The early days of thoroughbred racing was straightforward. If you had a good horse, you simply raced him against other horses for a winners-take-all purse. But as the sport grew, a race structure developed, catering for the different levels and abilities of horses. Over time, this became more advanced, to the point where today we sit with a fairly complicated system. How do we unpack it to gain a better understanding? We need to go back and start with a precocious young 2-year-old ready to make his racecourse debut.
The 2-year-old programs start in November, and 2-year-olds can only compete in their own age group until the 1st of April. Once the 1st of April arrives, a 2-year-old may compete in maiden plates against older horses. The reason being that we feel that they're mature enough where it's not going to hurt them. But up until that stage, 2-year-olds race against each other. Fillies often with colts early on, because the fillies are often more precocious and more forward than the colts. They do mature quicker, and then separate them after a month or so.
So how many young thoroughbreds enter the 2-year-old program?
I would say that the total number of horses entering a 2-year-old program in any one year would be about 2,500. That's spread across South Africa. And I would say only about 30% of those horses will race as 2-year-olds. The majority of young horses start their racing careers as early 3-year-olds. So that's in the Southern Hemisphere from the 1st of August. So I would say of the 2,500, maybe 600 or 700 will race as 2-year-olds. The rest will start early on in their 3-year-old career.
But what about the rest?
For the late 2-year-olds, and most of the horses starting of that same age will start as 3-year-olds, you have a pyramidal structure in place, and that's the way a horse will end up aiming at the top of the pyramid that culminate in your Grade 1 races.
Races are programmed for each level in the pyramid.
Okay, so what we'll do with the maiden plates, for older maidens, it would average about 36% of the total number of races programmed for older maidens, 3-year-olds and older, 7% for juveniles, that's 2-year-olds, 50% for winners, but that would include handicap winners and condition plate winners. And then of course 7% of the races are reserved for feature races. So it will be your listed, Grade 3, Grade 2, eventually the pinnacle, the top of the pinnacle being the Grade 1 races. But you've got to start at a base, and the base is a maiden plate. Right. So all horses will generally start in maiden company, and those races are reserved for horses that have never won a race, and they all carry level weights. Because that's how you're trying to find the relative ability of one horse against the other, racing the same age at level weights, and that's why you start in the maidens.
And this is where it starts to become more complicated.
The trouble with understanding this pyramidal structure is that there's a thing called a weight for age scale that confuses everybody, trainers, jockeys, and certainly the punting public, in that a horse is only fully matured when he hits 4 years of age. It's been a scale that's been in existence for 200 plus years, and it allocates a set amount of weight each month for immaturity. Okay, so the younger the horses, the more early on in his 2-year-old career, and certainly his 3-year-old career, there'll be an allocated weight allowance that horse will receive against older horses, 4-year-olds and older, because they haven't theoretically matured properly yet, and that would be the allowance they get for their age.
We'll be covering the weight for age scale and ratings later in the series. Let's go back now to the average 3-year-old and what race program is available.
For the ordinary 3-year-old that takes a few runs and he wins a maiden, and he may not be good enough to aim at those top races, depending on the assessment that the handicapper, or the rating that the handicapper allocates to that horse based on assessment, and there's a lot of parameters they look at, the average rating of the horses that they're racing against. And so that horse will be allocated a rating once he comes out of his maidens. That rating will then determine in which races he can run in. So generally, the better horses will win quickly, and they will progress then into the handicap races or plate races if the horse is really shown above average ability, and the trainer's trying to aim him eventually at the top of the pyramid at the feature races.
Trainers have the option to race their horses in the plate or condition races, or alternatively, go into the handicaps.
Conditioned races are races that are designed for horses to carry weight based on the number of wins they have.
Why have a conditions race as opposed to a handicap?
Okay, I'll tell you why. Because a novice plate, for instance, is a race designed for horses that have not won more than one race. So only maidens can run in a novice plate, and one-time winners can compete in a novice plate at level weights. At graduation, 1, 2-time winners and maidens can compete in a graduation plate, and there's an allowance of 3 kgs given to a horse that's of lesser, has one lesser number of races. So in a graduation plate, the 2-time winner carries 60, a 1-time winner carries 57, the maiden carries 54. There's a 3 kg spread between the horses based on wins, and the fillies given a sex allowance of 2.5 kgs. As you know, fillies have a built-in sex allowance to all their ratings. So £5 on average. Obviously, further up, the longer distance they go, it might be £3 or £3.5, and it does vary from racing jurisdiction to racing jurisdiction. So then from there, we used to have what we call a progress plate. So progress plate is for maidens, 1-time winners, 2-time winners, and 3-time winners. And the weight allocated to those horses is based on the number of wins. So 3-time winner will carry 61 in a progress plate, a 2-time winner 58, a 1-time winner 55. The fillies gets a sex allowance. So it's purely based on number of wins. And that was really how our old race figure system used to work. And that's why we still have plate races. And the reason we put on plate races is you may have a 3-year-old that comes out and wins really impressively. And the handicapper says, wow, this is a really top horse. I'm allocating him a rating of 95. Now, 95, this horse, even in September or October, where he's still getting quite a whack of an allowance, he might have to come into a race. He can only run in a race benchmark 80 or higher. Now, in a race benchmark 80 or higher, which is really your D division race, you're going to find some really good old knocking 4-year and 5-year-olds that are 4 and 5-time winners. It's not easy for a young horse to come and race at level weights, or even giving some of those horses weight and beat them. And that's where the criticism of the merit rating system is coming. So that pathway, the plate race pathway, gives a trainer and an owner an opportunity of racing his horse in a division where he races more at level weights against horses that are also classified as being above average, but not yet exposed at feature race level. But even in feature race level, you get these young 2-year-olds. They win a maiden juvenile well, they then place in the feature races, maybe even win one of those graded 2-year-old features. They're now 2-time winners. They've got merit ratings of 102 and 104. Yeah. They have a rest, they come out as 3-year-olds, they battle to compete, they often battle to beat the older horses early in their 3-year-old career. And I'm saying that's from August right through to maybe January. Later on, as they mature and they get stronger, you find that they're able to compete a lot easier. And the trainers now battle that. If you only had a handicapping type system in the pyramid, those horses would always be giving a lot of weight to hard knocking older horses. And we have found, the stats are there, that those horses often battle to beat those older hard knocking horses until they mature later on in their 3-year-old career.
Whilst plate or condition races are based on the old race figure system, they still have their advantages today.
While we've kept the plate race program going, even though we primarily a merit-rated handicap-based system, is that if the trainer believes that his horse has been allocated a higher rating by the handicapper than he's really is, or alternatively the trainer feels he may battle in a handicap because he's got a high rating, the plate rate races are the way to go with those horses, because the horses are allocated weight purely based on the number of wins they've achieved. So in a graduation plate, for instance, 2 or 3-year-olds that are both rated, one 3-year-old is rated 80, is a 2-time winner, will carry the same weight as another 2-time winner who's rated 100, because he's a 2-time winner. It's based, weight is purely allocated in accordance with the number of wins, like the old race figure system, where in a handicap, that same horse would have to give, there would be a 20 points difference, which is 20 pounds or 10 kgs difference. They wouldn't even run in the same race. The horse allocated 100 would have to race in a merit rating of 90 plus, and the horse rated 80 will obviously race in a race where the benchmark of the race is anywhere from 85 and below. They wouldn't even race in the same race. So for the trainer and owner who feels that undoubtedly his horse has too high a rating for the handicapping system, the plate racing structure gives those horses an opportunity of winning a few more races.
Okay.
Otherwise you end up with a very good horse stuck as a two-time winner, just not good enough to win at the high end of the handicaps, and this is the opportunity for the owner to win a few extra races.
The current race structure practiced in South Africa has evolved over time into what can only be described as an advanced and technical system.
Yeah, it's really complicated, Michelle. What I would say to the punters, and this is just a short explanation, that early on in the 3-year-old season, August through to December, I would say that if you pick up a race card and it's a handicap race and the 3-year-olds with the highest weight in the race, I would generally look to find the winner, either amongst the older horses that are receiving weight from the 3-year-old or another 3-year-old that's receiving weight from the highest rated 3-year-old in the race. That's early on, August through to December. Thereafter, the handicapper had given him a rating for that reason. He must believe he has a higher rating. If the horse hasn't achieved that rating, theoretically he should drop in the handicap anyway, so he'd become more competitive. But I would definitely aim my selections at the horses who are receiving weight from the higher rated 3-year-old. And a plate race is completely different. Don't look at the number of wins. If you run in a progress plate, a one-time winner may have a rating of 100 and he's receiving 6 kgs from a 3-time winner with a rating of 90. Always go with the horse who's best handicapped in that race, and that would be the horse who's carrying the lowest weight with the highest rating, and you will generally come out on top.
Although similar race systems are practiced in other racing countries around the world, each seem to have their own distinctive differences.
Well, it's interesting. South Africa is part of the Asian Racing Federation. There's about 8 countries that subscribe and are part of the Asian Federation, Racing Federation. And in order to harmonize and standardize the ratings of horses internationally, and it's very difficult because our horses don't compete internationally, we had to go for a system based on the allocation of weight according to rating. And that's what they use in Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, those other racing, Asian, New Zealand, those racing jurisdictions. But they have variances in their own system. So it's not a perfect system, but what it does, it gives that pyramid a base from which to work at into your graded race program. And in the old days we had the race figure system, which purely allocated weight according to the number of wins.
Yeah.
And that's also not a perfect system. But a combination of the two is most probably where we would find one day a more equitable system, and a system that the punters and owners and trainers would most probably view as being more fair.
Whilst the system clearly works, for the newcomer coming into racing, getting to grips with it can be a challenge.
You know, I think we should always be looking at trying to find a slightly better solution, or find a way in which we can tweak the system where it would seem more equitable to the punters out there and the owners and trainers. That after all, owners, without owners we don't have a business, because the punters wouldn't have anything to punt on. The owners take the largest financial risk in racing. In South Africa they subsidise the industry to the tune of about 500 million rand a year. So they're the guys who've got the risk on the table. A punter, if he's not happy with racing, he'll punt on soccer, he'll punt on numbers, he'll punt on anything if he doesn't like the racing game. It's a complicated game. That's why we market it as a game of skill as opposed to the numbers game. And that's why it's in the punter's interest to try and understand a little bit about form and ratings and handicaps, because it'll enable them, I feel, to be able to pick winners a little bit easier than it may seem when one just looks at it from a cold point of view.